Welcome to the WriterDojo with your host, Steve Diamond.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
And Larry Correa.
But I'm feeling much better now.
Today's episode, High Tides, Low Tides.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the WriterDojo. Glad to have you all with us today. How you feeling, Larry?
I'm feeling good because today's episode is the return of bad Twitter voice.
Bad Twitter voice. Now, I mean, it won't actually be for Twitter people.
It'll
be bad Amazon reviewer
This
voice.
is actually Amazon reviews.
Same thing.
It's the same guy.
Okay, so this episode is going to be broken into two parts. As you might have surmised from the title of the episode, high tides and low tides. So the idea here is high tides raise all ships, low tides sink everybody, okay? And so we want to talk about some of the things that we've seen where it kind of feels like people are just taking a crap on anything that's successful. And then we also, at the second half of the episode, we want to talk specifically about the very real things that actually are hurting the genres, the authors, and so on and so forth.
Just so you guys know, very rarely on this show do we ever name names of authors in a negative way. Overwhelmingly, we try, when we talk about other authors as examples, we try to stick with positive examples.
Right.
And when we use negative examples, we try not to insult that author.
Right.
That said, today, that is not the case because we do have a couple authors who, through their behavior, have actually damaged the entire genre in a way that is not hurting them. They got theirs. They got their money. Yeah. It's hurting young authors.
Right.
It's hurting up-and-coming authors.
So let's start with more the high tide side. Let's get the good news out of the way first so that we can end on bad Amazon reviewer voice, okay? So, high tides. What do we mean by this? What we mean is, and I guess what brought this about is I've seen a number of people, whether we're talking about Twitter, and I guess a lot of it is because of stuff that I've seen aimed at, say, people like J.K. Rowling or people like Tolkien, where people keep talking and looking at these authors and saying, oh, well, these authors don't matter, or they don't write things the way I would write them, so therefore they're crappy and we should stop listening to them. I hate all young adult fiction, so we should stop reading young adult fiction. I dislike all romance novels, therefore romance novels are hurting the industry.
Yeah, science fiction and fantasy aren't serious, and they're not serious literature, and it's just a waste of time.
Or J.R.R. Tolkien is dead. How come we keep putting him on bookshelves?
Yeah, why is J.R.R. Tolkien on bookshelves instead of me?
Yeah, and that one is a legit quote.
We've seen people say that, and that just shows they don't understand how book sales work. Right.
So the thing that I guess the point that I want us to discuss here on this side, Larry, is it's super, super easy for negativity to encroach on us as authors.
Yeah, and it's kind of a poison.
Yeah.
It's something that I see too many authors fall into this trap where they want to be really negative about everybody else. And here's the thing, there are some authors I can't stand on a deep personal level because I've dealt with them as other people. I mean, I've dealt with them as human beings, I've interacted with them, and I just think they're trash. But that said, I don't wish them failure as a writer. And I know they have fans. Mm-hmm. I know they have fans who love their work. And you know what? Good. In fact, there was one the other day, it was a writer who I can't stand, like on a personal level, I just can't stand the guy. He's just a dork. But I saw a guy I respect who's he's kind of like the news media punditry kind of thing, but he's a very smart guy. But he was talking about how he loved this guy's new book. And it's like, dude, you are an expert on certain geopolitical things, and I love your take, but your taste in literature sucks. But I didn't say that. Because why? At that point, all I'm doing is I'm pooping on somebody else's enjoyment.
Well, and it's very easy to single out an author. Okay, so we'll use J.R.R. Tolkien as an example. It's very easy to point at J.R.R. Tolkien and find things that you dislike in the way that he wrote things. That's easy.
Well, very easy, especially since he was a product of an entirely different time, an entirely different style that was not even in his time. It was an oddity.
Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to negatively point at that and say, well, Tolkien's stupid and he does these dumb things and blah, 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 blah. All you're doing, it's not like Tolkien's going to listen to you and change how he writes. One, he's freaking dead. And two, even if he was alive, he'd tell you to pound sand. Okay. You're not hurting that person. You're not hurting the author. You're hurting when you talk negatively in this way. The only person that you're hurting two different people. You're hurting one, yourself, because you're being pretty narrow-minded.
Well, if you're doing this as an author and you're doing this under your author, remember, guys, everything you say,
hurting yourself and your brand.
It's part of your brand. And let's say that you're an author and you have your whatever series that you write, and you start trashing on somebody unfairly, and the fans of that other guy that you're trashing, are they going to be more or less inclined to check out your work?
Well, and that's my point, Larry, is that the people that you're really insulting, it's not the author, it's not yourself and your kind of narrow-mindedness. You're insulting fans.
Yeah, like, so say, for example, I critique Stephen King.
Yeah.
But I'll say positive things about Stephen King, too.
As do I. I mean, I say them all the time.
Yeah, because like
positive and negative.
Wordsmithing, fantastic. He is a fantastic wordsmith. He's a very evocative storyteller. The dude is a master at coming up with creepy stuff.
Especially short fiction.
Oh, his short fiction is actually brilliant. Like, I have nothing really negative to say about his short fiction. But I also will say, professionally speaking, I think his endings are terrible. Not always. Sometimes they're good, but mostly his endings are just weak.
It's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm going to be fair here, and so I'm going to say that I'm not just going to like I'll rip on the dude as a human being because he doesn't know which end of the gun the bullets come out of, but he doesn't stop him from talking about it.
It's the bottom.
Yeah, the bottom part. Yeah. But it's like, I'm not going to rip on Stephen King fans and say, well, you like Stephen King, you're dumb. No, he's actually a really talented dude. And I can understand he's been doing this since the 70s, and he's produced dozens out of hundreds but he's got dozens of classic books that are really extremely good. So I'm not going to rip on Stephen King as an author, even though I think he's got some flaws as an author. I'm going to say, like, if you're a fan of Stephen King, I get it. I understand why you're a fan of Stephen King. That is an evocative storyteller. More power to you. Some people will bag on Dean Koontz because they think Dean Koontz is like, pulpy, predictable, formulaic. Whatever.
Popcorn, right.
Popcorn. But then again, Dean Koontz, once again, written hundreds of novels, has dozens of novels that are classics, that are brilliant. They're great novels. One of my personal favorites, I'm a big Louis L'Amour fan. I've seen people rip on Louis L'Amour.
Yep.
He's so formulaic. He was so pulpy. No, he was writing for the market at the time.
Well, people rip on Robert E. Howard for the same
reasons.
reasons.
And I'll fight you on that.
Oh yeah,
I'll straight up, I'll cut you. Okay, because Robert E. Howard was a genius, and honestly, if he had lived longer, he would be the greatest American author.
Well, I think it's very easy for us when we see people ripping on authors who we love. In mine and your cases, where we firmly agree with each other on the cases of guys like Louis L'Amour and Robert E. Howard. Okay, I think you and I are pretty well lockstep on that.
Oh yeah, they're awesome.
They're freaking rad.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder, I think, for individuals to look at a piece of fiction, a literary work that they dislike, and decide to be positive about it. Okay. Case in point here, Stephanie Meyer.
Oh yeah. Okay, this is an interesting one.
I dislike her actual writing intensely.
Not my thing at all.
It does not work for me in any facet at all.
But,
however, when you and I talk about Stephanie Meyer, for example, and we've done this on this show, and we've done it publicly. Well, I guess the show is technically public. Whatever. Anyway, point is, we always say how appreciative we are of Stephanie Meyer. And that's because Stephanie Meyer and a lot of these authors who, even if you don't like them, it's okay. But you need to recognize the good that they are doing for the genres.
Yeah, Stephanie Meyers in particular is one that, like, not my style at all. And in fact, I've talked about this on the show. One of the things I owe my career to is timing, and that I came along writing something that was diametrically different. It's still in the urban fantasy genre, same genre vaguely, even though she's more romance.
More YA, yeah.
But I came along writing novels with vicious vampires and vicious killer werewolves, and getting back to the horrific roots of the genre at just the right time, that the market saturation had gone very much romantic vampire, led by Stephanie Meyers.
Less sexy, more stabby.
And even actually before that, so when I was originally coming up and I started thinking about doing this, it was more Anne Rice than Stephanie Meyers.
Sure.
Same kind of thing, though. So I did something entirely different, but I actually owe a big part of my career to the market at the time saying, hey, look, we've seen this other thing. We've done this for the last few years. We want to return to our roots. We want to do something different. So even though I'm diametrically opposed to her in style, I still, the rising tide of her success, actually, I'm an offshoot of it in a way, because even though we were totally different, if she hadn't become so successful and sold so many books to so many people and become such a cultural juggernaut, there might not have been a hunger for Monster Hunter International.
That's absolutely correct, Larry. And I want to point out, I want to take it even a step further, and I want to say that the Venn diagrams of your fan bases, okay, it's not like that they're just touching on the very edge of the circle. There's overlap. And that's because contrast is everything. Okay? In your specific example, contrast is everything. And that's, she was writing sexy stuff, you were writing stabby and shooty stuff. Okay? And so when readers of one book saw the other, it was something different. It wasn't just more of the same. And therefore, it was easy for them to pick up and say, "Oh, okay, I see what's going on here." Instead of sexiness, well, these things will eat your face, so let's shoot them in the face.
Yeah.
And it takes an awful sort of substantial ego to look at a fan base of say someone like Stephanie Meyer in this case, and say, "There's no way in hell that her fan base does not have overlap with people who are reading my stuff. There's not a freaking chance.
Yeah.
There's always overlap."
Now, so part of being a writer is you're going to be critical, because you got to be critical of your own stuff to be a writer. Writers are the most critical reviewers. We have to be. Otherwise, we're crap, and we're going to be terrible writers. We have to be critical to ourselves, and we have to be critical about all the stuff we read. That said, even if it's something you hate, think about how you present your hate to the public. And in some cases, you might want to just keep it to yourself, because it's just going to damage your brand. This is nuts and bolts business here, guys. Yep. If you are a little upstart sci-fi writer and you want to rip on the greats of the field...
If you want to start ripping on Dune, maybe you slow your roll.
Slow your roll, man. Because, yeah, Dune, once again, product of his time, third-person omniscient, all this weird stuff that we don't really do nowadays. It's out of favor. It's out of fashion. But it's still a cultural juggernaut. Same thing if you want to rip on Ender's Game. You're going to run into the same thing, because there are millions of science fiction readers who have a very fond spot in their heart for Ender's Game because they read that book when they were 8 or 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to go out there and your public persona is going to talk about, hey, that stuff you love is stupid, and here's why it's stupid, well, guess what the readers are going to think of that? So you need to tread carefully with this. And once again, though, guys, we are critical, and you need to be honest, but also, this is like the old Mormon saying, be yourself and be your best self. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. How are you presenting this? Like, I'll bag all day long on the new Star Wars. Like, I'll rip on new Star Wars.
It's because it's bad.
But that's a hill I'm willing to die on. You know what I mean? But just saying, but as a writer, we're going to talk about a couple writers in the next section who I think are really damaging. They're lowering the tide. But I'm not going to bag on their work.
No.
I'm not going to bag on their work because their fans love those books. I'm going to bag on their work ethic.
Well, and I am never, ever going to tell someone what not to read.
No. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not for me, and I don't like it.
The more people read,
doesn't mean it's bad.
In general, the better it is for everyone who writes.
J.K. Rowling was honestly the single most important thing for writers. The most important cultural phenomena for writers of the last 20 years probably, because she got more people into reading books than anyone else, period.
Well, and made it so, kind of forced her way like the Kool-Aid man through the walls saying, no, anyone and everyone can read this, and anyone and everyone should read this. And you know what? That's okay.
Yeah, it was like the opposite of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
It was like,
it was burning down every gate possible. Like
they were
nuking it from orbit just to be sure.
And yeah, at the time, because it was such a cultural phenomenon for a while, it could get really super annoying as a writer to have like everybody you talk to that they could only relate to Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And hence the saying there for a while, like read another book, because every analogy they have is like, I'm a Huffleslither and a Slitherpuff and a Jiggly-Griff or whatever. I don't know.
I think you kind of mixed Pokemon in there, but whatever. It's all good.
I did actually read the books, but I don't really remember. But the thing is, like, once again, not for me. Doesn't matter. Cultural phenomenon. People loved it. Good for them.
Yeah. And so when you look at these things, when you look at all of these big time authors that are coming in, or you're just looking at a slew of mid-list or small authors that are coming in, a lot of them bring in people into the field of play. Okay, they bring people with them. Writing a book is very rarely done in a vacuum.
I've got a lot of readers that started with Harry Potter.
So do I.
Guaranteed.
I have a lot of readers that read this thing called Monster Hunter International.
Sometimes I'm the gateway drug.
Yeah.
Whatever, man. If it makes people happy, that's what counts.
And people need to stop looking at this like it's a zero-sum game. The pie, so to speak, okay, business terms here, the pie that represents the entire proportion of, or the entire population of readership in the world, that pie does not stay the same size from one day to the next, from one moment to the next. It is continually expanding or shrinking based upon various factors. The more authors that come in and bring their respective readerships with them, whether it's 5 people or 5 million people, that is going to change the size of the pie. Those people, once they are in the readership, once they are in the pie, they do not just buy one book and then skip town. They stick around to read other things. Even if that author writes something that maybe kind of sucks, that's okay. Because as soon as a reader reads a lot of books, okay, look, you and I, we both started reading things like Dragonlance, a lot of Forgotten Realms stuff, and or Terry Brooks, Louis L'Amour, as we've said, C.S. Lewis. Some of those books these days, if I were to go back and read them today, they wouldn't carry the same weight to me today as they did back when I first read them. But reading them in that time period has changed me to the point where it caused me to seek out other books, whether that I wanted to be just as good, that I wanted to be better, that I was like, well, as long as it's even half as good as this book, then it's going to be awesome. Point is, as long as these readers are out there, it's your job as a brand manager for yourself to make sure that you are in some way appealing to as many people as you can possibly get. If J.K. Rowling brings 5 gajillion people to them and only 1% of them attach to you, well, that's a small percentage of a gajillion that you didn't have before. If a reader brings, or if an author brings in 100 people into the giant pie of readership, but those 100 people, maybe they read the first book from Joe Schmo authordom, and they're like, this book sucks. But then they see your book, and they read your book, and they attach to it, and they're like, you know what? This book was really good. It was better than that last thing I read. That's a win for you too. So again, guys, point here, high tides raise all ships. Unless you're poking holes in your own ship. At that point, you're just going to sink.
After the break, we'll talk about the low tide.
So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, let's get into those people that keep punching holes in not just their own ships, but more so in everybody else's ships.
Hello, word mercenaries. I'm Thomas Umstadt Jr., host of the Novel Marketing Podcast, here to bring you book marketing commandment number 6. Thou shalt own thy own platform. Chicken coops have free food for the chickens because the chicken is the product being sold. Don't be a chicken. Be an owner, not a sharecropper, and pay for your own website, podcast, and email newsletter. If you're not a paying customer, you are easier to ignore, silence, and cancel. Don't waste your time trying to become social media famous. Instead, spend your time honing your craft so that you can write books good enough for your readers to talk about on social media. To learn more about how to promote your book with methods that actually work, subscribe to my podcast, Novel Marketing, or visit novelmarketing.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Okay, Larry, so first half we were talking about the positives, how we need to stop being so negative about everyone else's success or just the fact that other people are just different authors and they're bringing different crews into this giant pie. And we use the analogy of ships being raised or lowered by tides. So I think what we want to talk about now is there's a couple individuals out there who are hurting fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah, this
just
might happen
general.
in other genres too, but specifically today, we're going to talk about epic fantasy.
Yep. And I want us to personalize this because this literally has impacted you and I.
I'll use some examples. Okay, so very specifically, the two guys that I'm talking about are two of the biggest names in epic fantasy,
Yeah.
and that's George R.R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss. Because what we have here, for those of you that aren't familiar, these are two of the biggest names in fantasy. With George Martin had his Game of Thrones, Song of Fire and Ice novels, and he was writing them, and then he got an HBO show, huge mega hit there for a while, then they had a terrible ending. Well, George never finished the series, and I believe the last book came out, 12 years ago now?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the thing. So it was a big epic series, and he kept telling everybody it was going to be 7 books or whatever. I don't even know. Not my, once again, not my thing, right? Not my, I prefer to read about heroes, not victims and thugs.
Right.
Okay, and I prefer to write that. Now, Patrick Rothfuss, he had 2 books. He did 1 book that was a huge, incredible mega hit.
Insane.
I mean, in fact, it's still, I think it's been out 15 years now, 16
More.
years, something like that. And it is still every week on Nielsen Bookscan in the top 40 around America. I mean, it's usually in the top 10 all these years later. And then he had a sequel, wasn't quite as popular, wasn't as good from what I understand. And he's been promising the 3rd book for, 12 years?
I think 12 years, 10
Okay,
years, something like that.
But we got in these 2 situations. And the other one that gets brought up is Robert Jordan with Wheel of Time.
That's a different game.
And it's totally not fair because Robert Jordan died.
Yeah.
Robert Jordan got sick and died before he could finish the series.
And even at his worst, I mean, he was still putting out books every, I think, 3 years.
Yeah.
At the tail end, which is, I mean, he's still putting out books.
Considering the man was dying.
Considering he was dying.
And he knew he was dying, he still worked.
Yeah. Now, again, we're not talking about quality of writing, quality of fiction.
No, I'm not going to trash any of these guys. I'm not going to trash either of these 2 guys as far as their ability as writers.
No, and people who read their stuff and like it, hey, whatever. I mean, you read that stuff, that's awesome.
Yeah, so here's the thing. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, you don't need to yell at me because I got nothing against the books themselves. But let me talk about what's going on here, guys. The 2 biggest names in epic fantasy for a long time, and there's more now that came up that are the opposite of this, such as Brandon Sanderson. Brandon works and produces like mad. But what happened was George and Patrick did these series, and they promised an ending. Now, there's no such thing as unwritten contracts. Unwritten contracts are a figment of your imagination. The only contract here is between them and their publisher. But they were telling people that this is a series, it has a finale. Millions of people bought into these books. Mm-hmm. And what happened was over time, as time's gone on, it's become increasingly obvious that they're not going to finish the books. They might, maybe, but I sincerely doubt it.
I doubt it.
They got theirs. They got their money.
They did. They sat down. They wrote some stuff. in Martin's case, he got shows and he keeps getting spin-off
Well,
shows.
he's got HBO money he will never be able to spend before he dies. He's got so much money it doesn't matter to him.
That's right.
And Rothfuss, same thing. His royalties have got to be insane, and other stuff. I'm not going to talk about the guy's character other than his work ethic. But what we have here is a situation where the biggest names in epic fantasy made a promise, did not fulfill it, left millions of fans feeling burned. Now, this is the lower part. This is the part that sucks. Guys, epic fantasy tends to be series-based.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of big books. It takes time to write a whole bunch of big books. When you start an epic fantasy series, you have no guarantee that it's going to be financially lucrative, but it's going to be a giant time suck. So when you write that first book in your new epic fantasy series, if the readers do not purchase that first book, you're not going to be able to take all those months and years it takes to write another book. You're not going to be able to do it because you can't afford to. So what we've seen over the last decade is a strangulation of young up-and-coming fantasy authors, because what happens is so many readers got burned by Rothfuss and Martin's laziness and apathy and lack of work ethic and lack of integrity. And I'm sorry, I'm a former dairy farmer. I'll beat anybody on work ethic. Okay, so this is going to get a little passionate here, so I'm sorry. I talked to so many authors, fantasy authors. They got their epic magnum opus fantasy novel. They put it out there, indie, or they sell it to a publishing house, and they're excited, and the publishing house markets it, and the sales are crap. And the book is brilliant. The book is beautiful. The book deserves a 5 or 7 book series. It's majestic. But what happens is too many readers out there go, I'm not going to read it because I wait till the series is done. I've been burned too many times.
Yep, we see it every time.
Every day.
Every time any new author comes out with a piece of fiction. It seems especially prevalent in fantasy to me, Larry. But I know we see it. I know it happens in science fiction. I know it happens in all the other genres. But,
just so people
fantasy,
know,
yeah.
This isn't sour grapes for me personally, because what happened for me before I ever did epic fantasy, I already had a very successful series in urban fantasy, and then I had alternate history that was good too. So,
and it was finished.
And so I brought fans with me. So I am making plenty of money off Son of the Black Sword that I can keep going on the series. No problem.
And yet, you and I have had this conversation when it comes to Saga of the Forgotten Warrior before.
Oh, yeah. I still hear from people all the time. It's like, well, I'm going to wait till the series is finished. Well, guys, guess what? Even a successful epic fantasy series, it's still going to take them 10 years to get all the books out.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. That is the nature of the creation of the beast. But I want to illustrate this, guys. I have a couple reviews here from Amazon for me and for some other authors.
Yep.
And I want to just show how insidious this attitude is. And this first one was for me for Tower of Silence, which came out recently.
Right.
Book 4, Son of the Black Sword, or Book 4, Saga of the Forgotten Warrior, which is my epic fantasy series. So these are Amazon.
Prepare yourselves.
Okay, here we go.
Prepare yourselves.
Here we go. I'm done for now. First off, I enjoyed the book and I like the series. Keep in mind, guys, this is a 2-star review. The problem is that I spent most of this book thinking about how long it's going to be until the next book. And when is he actually going to finish the series or the MHI series? I'm slightly older than the author, and if he actually finishes this series, that is actually his typo, or MHI in my lifetime, then I will consider buying the remaining books in the series, but I'm not going to buy any more installments in an incomplete series. The way he's dragging things out, there's just too many things that can happen to where he ends up not finishing at all. All right, so
I remember. I remember when you posted about this online, and I believe I texted you immediately saying, "Larry, how dare you? How dare you not think of us mere mortals? I mean, for all we know, tomorrow you could die from having a meteor hit you in the face. Think of me, dang it!"
Well, I mean, it's pretty selfish of me the way he's dragging things out. There's just too many things that could happen to where he ends up not finishing at all. Yeah, I could get shot by the ATF tomorrow. I mean, let's be honest.
Probably. Well, I mean, Faust would first.
Well, they'd shoot my dog first, and then I go out like John Wick. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
I love that dog. But here's the thing, guys. He's talking about how I'm dragging the series. I've written believe I kind of did. I've written 24 novels and like 60 something short stories and like 8 novellas and edited like 4 anthologies since George Martin's last book came out.
In 15 years.
I'm
You've done
not,
all of that in 15 years,
yeah,
Larry.
guys, I'm not dragging things out. I'm actually very prolific. But here's the thing: this attitude. I'm reading the one for me here, guys. But every author I know gets this, and it's asinine. Because, guys, what they're asking for is a logistical impossibility. If you could churn out a book a month, I mean, there's some guys who do. But guess what? Those are not the quality epic fantasy novels that endure through the generations.
Right.
Books take time. Books take effort. I actually had this conversation with a friend of mine, great author, but we were up for an award at the same time. But he's an indie author, and he does the turn, like he turns them over fast.
Yeah.
So... And he was like, yeah, you're going to beat me. And I was like, well, dude, to be fair, okay, I'm coming at it where I spent like 8 months working on this book, cleaning this book up and polishing this book. I was like, how long did you have to write yours? He's like, 2 months. I was like, well, there you go, man. He's like, even if we were equivalent in skill, even if we had the exact same skill set, I got 4 times as much time as you did to improve my final product. So in the minds of the readers, if they find one better, that is not an insult to you. That's just a fact of the market that you're working in. Mm-hmm. But what these guys are talking about here, this entitled attitude of like, well, I expect this overnight. Guys, that ain't going to happen. So Saga of the Forgotten Warrior is going to be done in 10 years from first book to last. Because I got 1 book left. Mm-hmm. So barring me getting shot by the ATF because I own like 11 pistol braces, okay, guys, this is not how it works. And I got another one. I have another one that was actually sent to me by another author. And this is actually not from my book, but this is just to illustrate that it's all of us. And this is a author. It's actually 2 authors, Rhett C. Bruno and Jamie Castle. And it's a book called Cold as Hell, which I actually did a blurb for. And because I love the first one in the series, and the audiobook was narrated by the guy who was the main voice actor for Red Dead Redemption.
Oh,
it's fantastic.
Okay. Yeah.
Super good audiobook. Okay, so here we go. This is a 1-star review. Get ready. I'm 72 and will be 73 by the time book 2 releases. At the current rate of publishing, I'll be 75 for book 3. Sorry, guys. So little time. So many complete series to read. Recommend the books to 20 or 30-year-olds if you have a great memory and a lot of patience. Okay, first off, guys, I want to put this in perspective. Rhett and Jamie here are turning out 1 book a year. 1 book a year. And they're getting 1-star reviews from people. That's insane. Okay, but where does this attitude come from? It's because of Martin and Rothfuss burned an entire generation of fantasy authors. The other day, I was talking to once again, I try not to name people, and this is a good dude. I was talking to this fantasy author. He's a young guy, way younger than me and Steve. Very talented dude. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very talented guy. I really like him. I'm really rooting for him. I can't say that he's a friend of mine because he writes for a publishing house that doesn't like me.
Right.
But, I mean, Steve knows what I'm talking about. Good dude. And we were having this conversation about how his epic fantasy series, the same thing. He gets all the time people not wanting to check it out because it's not finished yet. Well, here's the kicker, guys. If you do not buy his first book, which is excellent and on its own a fantastic, entertaining, quality entertainment product, if you do not purchase it, his publishing house will not give him contracts for the rest of the series.
No, they'll drop him.
They will drop you.
Yeah.
They will drop you like a hot potato because you are red in the ledger.
Yep. Yeah, at a certain point, for a lot of these people, again, we're both accountants. So it comes down to, again, in the ledger, are you red or are you black?
Okay. how many potential Ericksons and Donaldsons and Gemmels tried and failed in the last decade because of the greed and hubris and laziness and dishonest apatheticness of Martin and Rothfuss? We will never know.
And that's the trouble, Larry, is I've seen this too. Okay, so last year we were at, last September we were at FanX, and we spoke with hundreds upon hundreds of people. A lot of them fans of yours, some of them fans of mine, some who'd never heard of us. And we're pretty good about letting anyone approach us and talk with us. about anything.
Oh gosh, yeah, all day long.
We had a big old stack for, about 15 minutes of Servants of War.
We sold a lot of books.
We sold a lot of freaking books. We could have sold a tremendous amount more, but that got screwed. So we had a ton of these copies of Servants of War. I had a number of people approach us who didn't know who we were. Because, the typical thing is someone goes by, you kind of catch their eye, you wave them over and you say, hey, what do you like to read? And almost inevitably, someone will say something like, oh, I really like epic fantasy. I'm a big fan of Brandon Sanderson's, because who isn't these days? So, and I'd say, oh, well, that's awesome. This book right here, written by me and Larry Correa, this is epic fantasy. This is the first book in a new series. About half these people, as soon as you said first book in a new fantasy series, it was like the light in their eyes dimmed a little. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not really keen on starting a new series right now. Or, well, I don't know that I can justify it because of Rothfuss and Martin.
It was never like that before those two guys.
No. And there were plenty of authors, to be fair. There were plenty of authors who have left series hanging in the lurch before them.
And the thing is, people kind of took that into account because back then they still realized that authors were human.
Yeah.
And they would realize that authors are human, fallible artists, and artists die. Artists lose their way. They're human, they're fallible. Guys, if you are limiting yourself to a series that has ended and you're not taking a gamble on these new guys, you're cutting their throats. You're ending their careers. You're depriving the world of potential great art. You need to get over yourselves.
Yeah.
If you're the jilted lover here, okay, and you're home sobbing in bed because you got stood up, all right, get over yourself. This is going to sound crude and mean, like I said, and this ain't personal. This ain't about me. I got mine. I'm doing good. I'm making good money. I got my fans. I had my fans before I got into epic fantasy, right? Guys, there are so many good authors out there. I plug them all the time. I plug young authors. I plug up-and-coming authors almost daily. I'm like, there's so many good authors out there. And so often you guys aren't giving them a chance.
I wonder this a lot, Larry. I seriously wonder this a lot. At the current stage of your career, if we were to take present day Larry with all of your sales, the fan base that you've cultivated and so on and so forth, if we were to take all this and just kind of pick it up and move it backwards in time about 15 years, okay? I often wonder how many more copies of Servants of War we would have sold.
Oh, guaranteed way more. Because it's the first book in a fantasy series.
Yep.
And that was before the taint of Martin and Rothfuss had spread. And honestly, I don't think people, it's killing authors. It's killing an entire genre.
Oh, if I'd written Servants of War all by myself and had put it out by myself,
DOA.
It'd be dead.
Yeah, DOA.
It'd be dead.
DOA. Even with my name on it and bringing a proportion of my, because every time it's a new series,
there's a different attach rate for new series no matter what.
So basically I have a Venn diagram, guys, of each one of my series and how much they overlap as far as, but it looks like a stack of pancakes and it's kind of sliding around. Mm-hmm. It's going to vary depending on the series.
Poor Krasnovia.
But stack of waffles. But the thing is, guys, if I didn't have my name in my fan base, then that wouldn't have done any good.
Yeah.
Because people are too hesitant, because the market's been burnt. But guys, market, I'm talking to the market directly, not the authors. Market, you got to get over yourself.
Yeah.
You got to move on. You're strangling these people. You're strangling these poor authors. They never have a shot if you don't give them a shot.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen this with Saga the Forgotten Warrior. We've seen this with Servants of War now.
Well, Saga the Forgotten Warrior is interesting because it's been a slow burn. And every time I increase the size of the series, and I already know it's going to be a 5-book series. And that's been the plan for the last, 7 years. Originally it was going to be a trilogy, but Tony Weisskopf said that weren't going to fit. But ever since the second book came out, we knew it was going to be that. And it theoretically should be 10 years from first book to last. Yeah. It might be 11, I don't know, but we're going to be right within that window.
Depends on publishing schedule.
It depends on publishing schedule, honestly. And there's just, here's the thing, guys. All authors were human. I had to delay last year due to a major, huge health problem with a member of my family.
Yep.
Sorry, writers, or sorry, 1-star reviewers on Amazon, but that comes first.
Yeah.
And otherwise, just hire a chatbot to write your books for you. Because, sorry guys, if you want art from artists are human, and that's what makes their art good.
You know, I remember talking with an author, Brian McClellan, who
Good dude.
He's a great guy. And I love his books. Aside from Brandon Sanderson, he probably has the closest to Brandon Sanderson's style magic systems as Brandon does, outside of Brandon. And his Powder Mage series is freaking rad. So I remember talking to him at Gen Con. Oh, this was right after book 2 came out in that series. So it's been a minute. He had basket accounting for his entire series.
Ouch.
Which sucks. It was for 3 books, not for 6.
For those of you that don't know, that's like you don't start collecting royalties on earning out until after the entire series is done.
Yeah. So, you know, if it was $10,000 a book, which his were much higher than that. If it was $10,000 a book for 3 books, then he has to earn not $10,000, he has to earn $30,000 in order to be considered break.
Those aren't the real numbers, but that illustrates how basket accounting works.
It was much more than that.
Publishers like that because it's good for their cash flow, but it really sucks for the author because it takes a while.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of weird negatives to that. Anyway, point is, book 1 came out. It was super well reviewed because the first Powder Mage book freaking rocks. It's awesome. Then the second book came out, and it was still really freaking good. I mean, Brian is a terrific author. He's a terrific author. But I remember talking to him. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know what's going on." He said, I'm just not selling very well. He said, and I'm not sure why. Even at that time, I kind of knew why. I'd already been in and out of the book business for a while, and I saw what was happening. And then, of course, years later, it's really easy to look back on this with hindsight and say, I know exactly what the frick was happening. Once the 3rd book came out and that trilogy was completed, all of a sudden, his sales spiked. Okay? And then for his next trilogy, he did really, really well because all of a sudden he had readers and he had a dedicated fan base who believed in him. He'd finished a trilogy, so all the people who were waiting on the fence finally, stepped in and read the book. But he was doing pretty okay with the 1st book. But again, to your earlier point, Larry, how many authors out there who are super awesome were never given the chance to write books 2 and 3 in their series because readers were like, I got burned by Rothfuss and Martin, so I'm not going to read anything right now.
Here's the kicker. I guarantee with absolute certainty in my heart, I have no way of proving this, but I know this is absolutely true, that there were several authors who would have had a 3-book, 5-book, 7-book series far better than Wise Man's Fear or Game of Thrones that did not get to finish it because of those 2 guys. I guarantee it. Absolute certainty. There's book 1s out there floating around that I have never heard of and you haven't heard of and no one has ever seen, and they got remaindered because they sent them out to the bookstore ourselves and they got dusty and sent back with the covers torn off. Okay?
For the paperbacks, yeah.
Yeah. Or actually, if they even got a paperback.
Yeah.
Which they might not have because of George Martin. Here's the thing, guys. George Martin don't care. George Martin's got $1 billion. George Martin has so much money. He's got a gravy faucet in his house.
And he doesn't have to finish his series.
He won't.
And he won't. And neither will Rothfuss, because there's no incentive on a personal level for them to do so.
When you guys in the audience, like once again, I'm talking to the readers, not the writers here. You guys in the audience, you can be mad at George and Pat. All right? That's great. Go ahead. Do not take it out on these other authors who have not failed you yet.
Yeah.
You never gave them a chance to fail you. You are the abused spouse in an abusive relationship, and it's time for you to move out of the trailer park.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that I think is the most disappointing about this, Larry, I'm I'm a pretty new author in the grand scheme of things in terms of production, right? I'm fairly, we'll say I'm fairly new at this. And I have a couple books out and a load of short stories out, but I'm still pretty new. You know, I have a science fiction series I'm working on. I have a series of thrillers I'm working on with Mike Rothman. And I have, you know, the Werewolf Cop series I want to do. I have a lot of these series. And the whole time I'm thinking of any of those series, I think, okay, well, I hope people give it a chance. You know, say I turn in Werewolf Cop tomorrow. Okay. And it was the best thing I'd ever written. I actually believe that the short story I wrote, which comes out in January, I think it's one of the best short stories. I think it's the best short story I've written.
Yeah, it's good. I edited it.
And
Homie and Casey.
Well, yeah. And I look at that and let's say I had, you know, the book was done. I turned it in tomorrow. My first thought of this is, well, Larry's name isn't on this cover. So, you know, I'm not insulated. Is this going to sell anything?
Well,
and unfortunately, guys like me, we have to worry about that.
You do. Luckily, urban fantasy readers weren't as burned as epic fantasy readers.
They haven't been because they've had guys like Butcher and Laurel.
That said, for a while, Jim did have his dry spell because life came and kicked Jim in the balls.
Yeah, I mean, he'd only produced 25 novels within like 10 years.
That's the kicker. Jim, for a while there, was producing a book and a half to 2 books a year for many, many years, and then he had like a 3-4 year spell that was just like
it was 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And what happened? Everybody got all butthurt. Because I tell you guys,
because they kept saying, and we saw this exact thing specifically, and we've argued with people specifically about this, Larry, where they said, you know, guys like Martin and Rothfuss and now Butcher, and they start lumping Butcher into that because they see him doing that, and we're like,
how many times did you see me jump in on that one?
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry that Jim has, you know, only written 9 million books and kept you occupied for hours upon hours.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry that he had a bad couple of years because of life.
Yeah, and so I jumped into Street Fight on that one a few times.
Yeah,
guys, don't be entitled jerks. That's the key. Keep in mind, authors are human, and if you don't give them a shot, they ain't going to get a shot.
But here's the super negative about this, Larry. And you and I were talking about this at the break, and that's that what's happening. The real kind of end cause or the end result of all this is we're seeing an entire generation of authors just die.
Yeah. Because
no one's reading them. So it's like what? Okay, so from a business perspective, do you remember when we were young and when you try to get your first credit card? And it was you try to get your credit card, but they said, no, you can't get a credit card because you don't have any credit. You're like, well, how do I get credit? I said, oh, well, you just get a credit card. You know, it's that kind of weird cycle of terribleness.
Well, they really changed that, didn't they?
Yeah, that's it's not a game. You know, whatever. You can sneeze and get 7 credit cards these days, but it's a somewhat related cycle here, where, you know, we have so many great authors out there, and they're told from the publishers, you know, write something that can be turned into a series. Like, okay, I'll write a series. So they go and they write a series, but no one buys it. They're like, well, maybe I should have just written a standalone. But then the people are like, well, no. Publishers are like, no. Don't write a standalone because standalones don't have the selling power of series, which is statistically true. So they're like, well, then what am I writing then? I can't write a series because it might not sell, but I can't write a standalone because it doesn't sell like a series. So what am I supposed to write? And a lot of this is just fallout from people who refuse to be professionals.
Whatever they choose to write, I'm sure it'll have a better ending than Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's probably true. All right. that's all the time we have for you today. I know we kind of ended on a negative, sour note there, but it's more of a plea. This is more of a plea to you who are out there. Now, we know that a lot of the people who listen to this are authors. So it's important for you, one, to understand what's going on right now, but also to educate your reader bases on what's happening with this. The more education, the more people understand how this is hurting, not just, me or Larry or you, Joe Schmo, out there as the author.
Or Daw, the publisher.
Or Daw, the publisher, who probably is going to exist within
now
a year.
is owned by the communist Chinese because they...
Yeah. It's important for you to educate your fan bases and say, look, if you don't put a little bit of faith in us, you're never going to be able to put faith in us again after this, because we're all gonna disappear.
You could wait for the end of the series, but there won't be any.
Yeah. All right. So that's all the time we have for you today. If you have any other questions about this, of course, you can always send them in. And look, we appreciate what you guys do. We appreciate frankly, we appreciate the faith that you've put in us for this podcast. I think we've put out 85, 86, something like that episodes. We're closing in on the century mark pretty quick here. And we appreciate all of you who've stuck with us for this duration, or who've come in during the middle or just recently. So we appreciate all of you guys, and we appreciate those of you who also happen to be our readers out there. Keep reading. Read far and wide. And for you authors out there, remember, high tides raise all ships. Be one of the people who's helping raise the ships. Don't be the guy who's poking holes in other people's ships. All right? This is the Writer Dojo. We'll see you on the next one.
Writer Dojo is Steve Diamond and Larry Correa. Produced by Jack Wilder and Bear and Hare Studios. Theme song, Word Mercenaries by Craig Nybo. New episodes come out every Wednesday wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/WriterDojo, by leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on the Writer Dojo, email ads@writerdojo.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to questions@writerdojo.com.
Like, I'm a Huffle Slither and a Slitherpuff and a Jiggly Griff or whatever.